Welcome to Green and Red, Scrappy Politics for Scrappy People, a regular podcast on radical, environmental and anti-capitalist politics, brought to you by Bob Bazanko and Scott Parkin.
Welcome to the silky smooth sounds of the Green and Red podcast. And I'm Scott Parkin, your co-host in Berkeley, California. And as always, I am joined by
Bob Bazanko in Houston, Texas. And we're ahead into our fifth year. With that in mind, we're going to talk a little bit about our thoughts on 2024 and some recent events. But also, since everybody else is doing it, we'd like to take this moment to ask for a little bit of support. If you might have some extra change laying around, it could fold or jingle, as we like to say. But we always could use a little bit of support. We even have some gifts available for donations. So I think Scott knows way more about that than I do.
We have the most fantastic merchandise. We have Green and Red merchandise. It is best merchandise ever. The most amazing merchandise.
It's perfect.
It's perfect. Green and Red podcast has the perfect merchandise. Hopefully many of you are familiar that we have the Green and Red podcast trucker hat. $25. You can get a trucker hat while they last. The $25 includes shipping and handling. Just email us at greenredpodcast@gmail.com and we will get back to you and send you a hat. And then Bob's going to go at number 2.
Yeah, this is a book I wrote some time ago, which actually was well reviewed and even won an award. Seymour Hirsch blurbs it on the back, which is very cool. But at any rate, this is available as well for a donation. If you ever want to get into an argument with the JFK conspiracy people, like, this is really going to help you out because you can put them in their place because Kennedy was not a dove.
That's your book. That's your book.
Yep. This is available as well.
And then number 3 is for me here, which is for the 3rd year in a row. We have a number of certain days calendars, which is a calendar for freedom for political prisoners. And so if you make a donation of $25 or more to the Green and Red podcast, you will also get a certain days calendar. And shout out to the Certain Days Collective and our friend Daniel McGowan and folks like that who work pretty tirelessly to put this together year round. And if you want to make a donation, you can go to greenandredpodcast.org and hit that donate button, or you can become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast.
Yeah. We appreciate anything you can come up with. We know it's tough out there. There's a lot of people who want your money. There's a lot of good folks doing good stuff out there, but anything you could do, we have a little bit of overhead, would be nice to have a little support, but we do just appreciate listening and subscribing and following and reviewing and rating and all that kind of stuff you're familiar with.
We're a scrappy, lefty boutique podcast. We bring you stories that you don't hear from many other places until after we've done it. And then somehow they mysteriously show up in other outlets and other websites and podcasts and things like that. Just as we're watching, we see everything that those other people are doing when they're looking for stories, I guess. And we've been doing this for almost 5 years. I think in February, it'll be 5 years since the Green and Red podcast. We're going to have a big party. I just got to say, and you're all invited. Just keep that in mind. One other quick announcement too is in January here in the Bay Area, we're also going to be doing a live event, which will include Bob Bazanko, Flashpoints' Dennis Bernstein, who was a recent guest on the show, and probably a couple of other people as well. And so if you're we're still putting it together. It'll be the week of January 13th, likely the 16th or 17th. But if you are in the Bay Area and you want to come check out the Green and Red podcast live event, we will be getting that together and would love for you to come turn out. And even if you want to come volunteer and support, we would appreciate that. Just email us at greenredpodcast@gmail.com and I'll give you more details on that. We'll be talking a lot more about that on our channels as well. But on with the show. Well, actually before the show, since we're actually talking about money, I just want to note that just the piece of news that we saw just right before this is how Biden just pardoned a woman named Rita Crunwell, who was the former comptroller of Dixon, Illinois. She had actually embezzled $53 million from the city's taxpayers to buy hundreds of American quarter horses and to compete against fellow owners, including Terry Bradshaw, which I think is funny. But surprisingly, Joe pardoned her. We're hearing a lot about presidential pardons right now. We're hearing a lot about the Hunter pardon. we're hearing a lot about Trump pardoning all the January 6th political prisoners who are going to get pardoned on day one of the Trump administration, but not so much about people like Rita Crunwell. I'm just wondering, Bob, when do you think Joe gave her a pardon?
You don't want to mess with the American equestrian team. Wasn't Mitt Romney's wife or sister or something in the Olympics for that? I believe.
I believe so.
I think she was,
Yeah.
To be semi-serious, this is actually what pardons do. This is what they're for. It was funny with the Hunter Biden pardon, there was all this outrage and shit. But to me, I must not be like a good lefty because the Hunter Biden I didn't care. I don't really give a shit.
I think that just makes you not a good liberal, actually.
Because he's a drug problem. I don't think there was any violence involved. Guy doesn't need to go to jail. But people like, I forget her name, are equestrian there.
Rita Cromwell.
Yeah. Rita Cromwell. That sounds like a name you'd make up in a sitcom.
It sounds like out of a Harry Potter novel or something.
Yeah, something like that, right? But that's who gets pardons, right? Pardons go to rich and powerful people. Richard Nixon is the most famous, right? Mark Rich. What's often people like who have money, who make donations. Hell, Trump, wasn't he like peddling pardons? Wasn't he like selling them at the end of 2020?
Yes. In Trump's defense, not that I'm one to defend Trump, there's actually a whole cottage industry. I have some personal family history with this. There's a whole pardon industry where you hire pardon lawyers and drop tens of thousands of dollars to try and get presidential pardons for your loved ones.
Yeah. I think the only difference with Trump is it was like in typical Trump fashion, just very open, like almost putting out ads. Like, if you want a pardon, send me money.
There was probably some infomercials on it.
Yeah, but the point is, it's like, to me, what's more grave is Leonard Peltier was again turned down for parole, and absent the pardon, guy's going to die in jail. And there's who knows how many people who were in there on trumped up drug charges or
even just nonviolent drug charges.
Nonviolent drug charges. There's, fair number. There's just people, how many crimes are caused by poverty or just shit like that. So if those people aren't going to be pardoned and they're not, then I don't really care. I think the January 6th pardons are disgusting. But again, doesn't that show why the Republicans win and the Democrats lose? Why the Democrats are the Washington Generals? They won't pardon people who just got caught up in the system or whatever. Whereas the GOP openly embraces its most violent criminals and offers them sanctuary, legal immunity. If you want to know why Democrats lose and Republicans win, they're playing a different game. The Republicans are playing like hardball and the Democrats are in this like kind of unconditional surrender. Like they voluntarily disarm themselves.
Yeah. In a sense, I guess it's both parties looking out for their constituencies. Trump looking out for like far right militia, MAGA fanatics, and the Democrats looking out for wealthy donors.
Yeah.
Their children.
Yeah.
I have no doubt Trump would not hesitate to pardon one of his children immediately.
I would pardon my kids. I mean, I don't get that part at all. Of course, this is what the ruling, that's why, even the Ivanka and Jared Kushner shit, which did go over the line because they're investing in foreign countries and God knows what, but this is what the ruling class does. I just, I don't like it. It's bullshit, but it's not based on merit, but this is what they do. They take care of their children, always have, always will. So I don't have the energy to get that upset over stuff like that. Biden's, I don't care. So many of these lefty journalists were up on these rants and raves about it. I guess whatever, I don't know. I think Biden should be in the docket for war crimes himself. I don't care about his kid. I think he's a war criminal. He's a genocide, an agent of genocides. Anyway.
Speaking of people needing pardons in the legal system, I think we're going to move into our next topic, which is the sort of topic of the day for many people for a week and a half, 10 days, going on 10 days now, which is Luigi Mangione. And we've done some social media on this, but we haven't actually talked about it on the show yet. About 10 days ago on December 4th, a hooded masked person shot United Healthcare Insurance Division CEO Brian Thompson and killed him, which, I'll be honest, part of the media narrative was about the chase and the clues and the posting the pictures of him before they had found out. And then since they've caught Luigi Mangione, who's the alleged shooter, who's a 26-year-old Ivy League grad from a prominent family in Baltimore. His family also owns nursing homes, so I'm just wondering how much they actually profited from the for-profit insurance sector, just to put that out there. But a lot of the narrative was about the shooter and the chase and the clues that he left. He left a backpack full of Monopoly money and all of that sort of thing. But the more interesting thing has been the reaction to the shooting and to Luigi's actions, and which has been outrage. And it's outrage at the health insurance industry. It's been outrage at corporate America. It's been outrage at CEOs. And I think we're going to have a little bit of a conversation about that. Just let's throw a couple quick facts out just to kick this off. But 68,000 people die every year from insurance coverage denials. 41% of all debt in America is medical debt. And then actually one I just saw this morning that Michael Moore wrote about is there's 1 million doctors in America, and there's 1.4 million people working for these insurance companies as corporate bureaucrats denying people health coverage.
Yeah. Yeah, you have people who make, I don't know, probably a little more than minimum wage, but not much. They're functionaries, and they're the ones making these decisions. So it's scary, right? And this is where my socialist comes out. Like the idea that a health system would be based on profit is just stunning. Literally, it's like paying for utilities too, like water. You have to pay for water. You have to pay for light. You die because you can't pay for medical care. It's really quite remarkable. But as you pointed out, I think the striking thing about this is what a fucking powder keg it is. Who knew? There was obviously the obligatory outrage. The guy had a family, he had kids. I guess the one part of that gets me is that there are some people who were outraged there were some people who were reveling in it and really happy about taking joy in the fact that the guy was killed. I'm not like that, but it is ironic, right? I bet that there's he did a Venn diagram. There'd be a huge middle section where people who are, upset at the Brian Thompson killing have never said a word about Gaza. So a lot of this outrage is quite, but I think, that the response to it is really, it just set off a spark, like, wow, I was shocked, like myself, and you and I have always said, like, the American people are way different than the political parties. I would actually say they're more progressive or more left or whatever. And, right after we had a postmortem by the Democrats after their disastrous campaign, and their postmortem is to circle the wagons and blame
where no one ever talked about healthcare.
No one talked about healthcare, right?
Yeah.
But they blame the left, and they blame wokeness and cancel culture and LGBTQ sports and all that kind of shit. And they specifically avoided any kind of talk about economics or healthcare, poverty, or any of that. By the way, we did a show about a month ago, a great show. We were on top of things, right? We were ahead of the loop with Stephen Besruchka, who wrote a book called Inequality Kills Us All. Yeah. Which should be a bestseller right now. It talks about all this stuff, right? But I think the response to that shows not necessarily that America's a lot of people who are pissed off, I assume, voted for Trump. I bet a lot of them did, right? So it's not even a left-right thing. It's just there's a lot of people who are really pissed off at corporate power. And in some freaking bizarro universe, somehow, the mind of people have been able to take advantage of that and own it, right? There's some people who would give corporations whatever they want, gazillion-dollar tax cuts and end of regulations and open bribes for permits and shit like that. Yet they've somehow kind of embraced that mantle of being like anti-corporate crusaders. And we're seeing that right now. Like people are pissed off, and the stories every day. And I know you and I have followed this shit. None of this is a shock, but just the intensity of it is really quite remarkable. And a lot of doctors are commenting on it too.
Yeah, part of the reaction is there's the sort of knee-jerk lefty, quote unquote influencer sort of stuff. But the more telling stuff has been where we see quotes from ER nurses and doctors and people who have been patients or customers or whatever they call them at United Healthcare, and who are very much like, they're everything from he got what he deserved to I have no sympathy because I work in an ER and I see people get denied insurance claims for life-saving treatment every day. By the way, at least anecdotally, what I was seeing is that healthcare was not denying coverage claims for a couple of days after the shooting.
And going into this, United has the highest rate of denials. I forget what it was. It was over.
It's 32%. It's like a third of their claims are denied.
And I didn't read the specifics of it too much, but apparently they're using like some AI algorithms now, which are like mistaken 90% of the time or something.
I think it's called Medicare Access. And it was also particularly affecting seniors. who were doing insurance claims, and seniors already have issues. Everyone who's older is going to be as tech savvy as a Gen Zer, right? As someone who's 30. And I think there was like that. There's a lot of problems in that as well.
Dude, I'm looking into Medicare stuff right now. It's complex. But it's also funny, which I did not know. Not surprising. I just didn't know the specifics of it. But do you know who the biggest owners of United Healthcare are? Vanguard owns about 85 million shares. BlackRock, almost 74 million. State Street, 45 million. Right? Those are the three biggest hedge funds in America.
Yeah.
And they own, and if they own United, I assume they probably own big chunks of Blue Cross and Aetna and Chelsea Seymour and everybody else as well.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's part of the story here too, right?
This is a for-profit. Like when we talk about like medical care on a personal level, right? It's about feeling better. Hey, you feel okay? Just go to the doctor. You feel better. How's your antibiotics work? How's that rash? Shit like that.
Yeah.
That's not how they think about it. To them, it's just like, how do we get profits? Like, how do we make as much money as possible?
One thing I'll throw out there too, which I've actually been following the posts and the articles by independent journalist Ken Klippenstein, who actually has been reporting on two different threads. One, he's reporting about how the mainstream media is actually really trying to play down a whole bunch of stuff with the shooter Luigi Mangione, too, because they don't want to make him a hero. They supposedly don't want to encourage copycats. But then two, the other thing he's been putting out a lot is he's getting leaked a lot of inside talking points and videos from the leadership at United Healthcare. One of the things you saying that actually reminded me that Andrew Whitty, who's the CEO of the parent company, United Healthcare, actually, one of the things he said one of his first videos after the shooting is that we will continue to guard against unnecessary care.
Yeah.
Just think about that for a minute, is that we are not going to back off on denying people healthcare because it's going to cost us money. It's not profitable.
Talking about like frivolous, like plastic surgery, which is not covered by healthcare anyway. We're talking about people who have like cancer, who have diabetes, who are diabetic, who have heart problems, who have all of us. Everybody I know has a story. Like my family members, plenty of stories. I've seen medical bills come in that are like in the $1 million range for sustained coverage. And it's really, you mentioned earlier that 41% of debt was medical debt. It's the biggest cause of bankruptcy in America too, is medical debt, right? It's really, but again, like, we can talk about this. And the good thing about this is like, everybody knows it's like, we won that debate. Like, it's not like we won it, we had to do it. It's like, it's just, most people I think understand how bad the medical system is and how expensive it is and all that kind of stuff, right? And like I said, watch the Bezruchka interview because it's quite good on this stuff. But again, what's striking is like two things. One, how many people responded to this in one way or the other. I guess you call it like a positive way, right? And the other part of it, I think, is you pointed out, these people are scared. Atrium Health in North Carolina forgave the debts of 12,000 people just a couple of days ago, right?
Right.
And just anecdotally, again, we're hearing stories where a couple of days after that, United Healthcare wasn't really turning people down. But the funnier part of this is like all these CEOs now are like really doubling down on security and getting the police out,
taking their profiles, pictures off their website,
scrubbing the website.
They're putting fencing. I didn't know this when I just read this today. They're putting up fencing around some of the corporate headquarters. And it's not just the CEO sort of scare is actually not just affecting healthcare CEOs. All CEOs are scared. They had a big Goldman Sachs conference in New York this week, and activists actually put up wanted posters of every CEO who was actually in attendance all over New York, and had one wanted poster of Brian Thompson with an X across his face. And there's a lot of, this poor community of CEOs is being terrorized by the left or by the public or what have you. Feel really bad for them, not really.
And we
shouldn't be afraid to leave their houses. Let's just put it out there directly.
And we see a lot of images like a protest, right, against bankers, against oil companies and so forth. So this is a long-time tactic. People do it forever. Civil rights movement, before that, you did it, right?
Yeah. So Jones marched kids to the house of Theodore Roosevelt, child minors 120 years ago.
Yeah. So this is an old tactic, right? And We're also going to see like more of a crackdown with the police, with new laws and all that kind of shit. You already have a law which had bipartisan support, basically saying that the Treasury Department can reject the nonprofit status of certain groups. Now it's Palestine, but that's not just going to be for pro-Palestinian groups. That's going to be for environmental groups and everybody else as well.
Planned Parenthood, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. But I think, there's a level out there. This is one guy, Luigi, who no one ever heard about. Apparently had some political leanings, but he's certainly not the kind of guy you would like see leading, being a vanguard. And look at how that one event, the lone wolf thing, just sparked it. And look at how afraid these CEOs are from one event, at this point, isolated single event.
And I will say he had some very creative messaging in his activity, putting defend, oppose, delay.
Defend,
deny, depose.
Deny, delay, something like that. Yeah. On the casings.
Defend, deny, depose.
Yeah.
On the casings, he left a backpack, which they thought was his backpack full of Monopoly money.
Yeah.
He definitely, all what the stories say is that his leanings were actually a little bit more center right, and he was a fan of Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and things like that. But definitely was moved against the healthcare industry. And it really plays into this sort of historical concept of social banditry with Robin Hood, who's, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, and Jesse James or Billy the Kid. We're actually going to be doing a show in the near future around bank robbery. And we're going to be talking about some of these figures, some of these films about some of these sort of more social bandit figures, Butch Cassidy and Bonnie and Clyde, et cetera.
I forget which one of the elite mainstream papers wrote something about that, but actually invoked Hobsbawm, because Hobsbawm wrote about social bandits and other figures and things like that.
Yeah.
But it's one guy. Imagine, and I'm not suggesting you need to go out and shoot CEOs, but active militant resistance could really get these people. You need to make them afraid, right? In the summer of 2020, the ruling class was afraid. The cities were burning and banks were have their windows bashed, and Walmarts and Targets and police precincts were being attacked and burned, things like that. And
with high approval ratings.
With high approval ratings. And Louis, I don't know if anybody, they probably won't do a poll on it because they're afraid.
YouGov did a poll, which I pulled the numbers on.
Oh,
YouGov.
Okay.
Which said that 51% of a slim majority of Americans said the shooting was inappropriate. 22% said they thought it was appropriate, that's fairly big number of people in the country endorsing murder. And then 28% said they weren't sure whether it was okay or not.
Appropriate. That's a funny word for Americans. Murders could be appropriate.
Another interesting tidbit from that poll I just want to read out is that 13% of respondents said they always or usually feel happy when something bad happens to a public figure they dislike.
13%? Bullshit. That's 100%.
23% said that they never feel happy in those cases, and 27% said they rarely or sometimes feel happy in those cases.
Oh, bullshit. Everybody. When their enemies fail, that's the whole point of Schadenfreude, right? Thank God. No, I think these folks, it's not hard to rattle them. And clearly Luigi, it's funny when this happened. When I heard his name, when I finally saw the report of his name, my first thought was, this is anti-Italian-American discrimination, Sylvia and right? No, I think we're in a weird moment, right? Where the political system is so freaking upside down, where the correct question isn't whether murder is appropriate or not. I think the correct question there would be like, do you understand why he did it? And if that was the question, I suspect it would be way over 50% who would say, yeah, I do. I have no issue with you saying, I don't believe in murder. That's fine. But do you know why he did it? Oh, hell yeah. I think you're going to get a lot of that.
Yeah, that's a more interesting question, right?
It is and even in that poll, 49% of people said it's appropriate or I'm not sure. That's still a lot. When you have a 50-50 split on political assassination, and
domestically.
Yeah. I remember, forever, but especially, when we make fun of Bernie Sanders a lot, I do understand Bernie Sanders is the best you're going to get. He's done some good stuff, and raising the issue of Medicare for all and healthcare is, I think, one of the most important things he did. And if the Democratic Party had ever embraced that, look at their healthcare reform. They tried it with Clinton, which didn't even get off the ground. And immediately in 1993, they said public health care is off the table. We're not going to consider that. 2009, with the Affordable Care Act, Obamacare, same thing. That's off the table, right? If somebody in the Democratic Party, if the Democratic Party had simply said, you know what, we are going to go all in on some kind of healthcare system, they win elections for the next 30 years.
Oh yeah.
It's always a big, huge issue. It's the biggest source of consternation in families. You're dealing with, first of all, somebody's sick, somebody's diagnosed with a bad disease. That's horrible. And then how do you pay for it? How many Americans lose their life savings in their last years of life? Years ago, I was in a doctor's office chatting with a guy, and he told me numbers which I don't remember. This is a doctor who said that the biggest problem in healthcare is keeping people alive. At the end, these doctors foist these treatments on people to extend their lives by a couple months, and they end up going into debt and losing everything. And it's so common, and everybody has some experience of it as well. You've had people in your family. We both have lost people in the past 12 months with medical problems, and it's everybody embraces it. Everybody understands that. And, you know, politically, what's funny is, like, for you and I, this is not a leap of faith. We understand. We've been saying shit like this our whole lives, but Rick Perlstein, he's a well-known liberal journalist who generally avoids stuff like this. And he would harangue people who refused to vote for Kamala Harris over Gaza. What did he say? You're morally immature or something like that. But he's even writing about, you know, how he understands, like, this is a big issue and the Democratic Party has missed out on it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that this is a Democrats issue because they're hopeless, right? But I do think it's an issue around which all of us can organize and expand it, right? It's not just about healthcare. It's about all this stuff.
Yeah. I would actually, I don't want to say that the Democrats are missing the issue. I actually think that they're organized to not support the majority of people on many issues, healthcare being one of them. I keep thinking back to what Obama told the finance CEOs in 2009 when they met with him, is that my administration is the only thing between you and the pitchforks. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they have their corporate sponsors, and they are going to be with obviously Kamala Harris. She went down with the corporate sponsorship, right? Yeah. And the Zionistship. That's a whole other thing. And I think most Americans, whether they vote for Harris or Trump or a third party, are aware of this, and they're pissed off about it. And that's where we're at. We're at this level of inequality is happening, financial inequality, economic injustice, whatever you want to call it. And people are, like, pissed off about it. The Brianna Boston, who is this woman in Lakeland, Florida, who was on the phone with a United Healthcare corporate bureaucrat, basically said the deny, depose, defend, and you people get what you deserve. And, like, they have arrested her for making terroristic threats, and she's looking at 15 years in prison. She doesn't even own a gun. There's no guns in her house. She's a mom. She's a middle-class mom of 3. And it's the ruling class backlashing because they're scared of what Luigi's this sort of symbol of what has happened and what he did. But it's brought things to a head.
Well, and the target, they'll defend healthcare. MAGA people are making death threats all of the time, right? They're threatening and librarians and election workers and teachers and drag shows, whatever. They don't even hide it. They're like, Trump makes death threats on social media.
Mm-hmm. So judges presiding over cases he's actively part of, and their families.
All those charges dropped. We haven't talked about any of it. We haven't had really, like, an election discussion yet, but that would go on forever. Yeah. They're afraid it's the target. They're afraid. You don't want to, and for years I've heard, you know, from liberals, like, the Democrats believe in this, but they can't say it. Bullshit. Like, healthcare's always been a winning issue. Abortion rights were always a winning issue. Gun violence is a winning issue. Wages are a winning issue. Unions are a winning issue. Every fucking major issue, it should be in their ballpark, and they've run away from all of it. It's like a unilateral disarmament, right? And this clearly shows that right now, if you started, like, a long-term campaign to organize on this issue, I believe it would have some potential. Healthcare is a big deal. And right now you're seeing the ruling class is scared, the liberal class, especially. You have all these, like, hacks like Thomas Burnetzel and Marie Teixeira writing about the Democrats and how they're too far to the left and they're too extreme. The Democrats are too extreme. Americans are fucking making a hero out of an assassin. And yet the Democrats are too extreme because they like drag show. I don't know what.
But let's also just go back. We could just to touch on the election. I think we brought this up in some of our recent interviews. But in red states that Trump carried, states that have gone Republican for many years, many times, has had what I would call progressive initiatives on ballot referendums or whatever, and minimum wage, expanding Medicare, abortion, climate protection. And those are passing like overwhelmingly. Like Missouri passed a minimum wage increase overwhelmingly, whereas like Harris was like trounced in Missouri. It's just like an important thing to note is that when people like Roy Teixeira or these other, let's just call them pundits, and we're not pundits here. We're just sharing our opinion.
I know I'm not, because to be a pundit, don't people have to listen to you and like, believe you?
You also have to get paid 6 or 7 figures too.
I don't be a pundit for that.
Maybe we are pundits. We're just like, pro bono pundit. Pro bono pundit.
On my card, I got a new card made. Pro bono pundit.
Pro bono pundit. Exactly. Like Abe Simpson, we have a lot of opinions to share.
Yeah. Back in my day, we wore an onion around our belt. Get off my.
A large percentage of the country runs to the left when you talk about issues. When you talk about parties, then they're going to go with whichever personality they like better.
We have coming out soon, we'll have another interview with a very well-known historian and activist, Jeremy Brecker, who's very active in it's called the Labor Network for Sustainability. He's this big issue trying to merge labor and environmental issues. But he mentioned to us that there are over 100 local areas, municipalities, cities, and so forth, with versions of Green New Deal laws, including Mississippi, right?
And Alabama.
So this is the point. If you say the Democratic Party is the party of liberal elites, right? They're the party of San Francisco, the party of Manhattan, this and that, right? So it's easy to understand why people would say, oh, no, I don't the Democrats, right? But if you mention these issues, then it's very different, right? When you get the Democratic Party, like they're California, New York, Hakeem Jeffries, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, their leadership it comes from the liberal elite. And there's a real, I think it can be facile to simply say the Democrats need to run an economics-based or materialist-based campaign. I think there's more to it than that. The fact that Trump said and did the crazy shit he said and done and got away with it is frightening and in a lot of ways inexplicable, right? And I don't know, we could talk forever on that too. But the fact is, clearly this shows that is a winning issue, that it does matter, right? That if you ran a campaign and said, I'm going to give you health care, you talk to people, especially once people get it to be there in their 30s and 40s, like they're always talking about healthcare, right?
Yeah.
And when you're 20, you're young, you're in good shape. You don't really think about that. You want to have fun or travel or do whatever. By the time you're older, like you want a good healthcare plan. Like in retirement, that's a huge issue. Obviously, this goes without saying, like without a national healthcare system, healthcare is a form of control, right? You can't lose your job. You don't want to cause any trouble. If you have a union vote, they're going to say you lose your health care, right? Think of it like that's one thing about cancel culture on the left too that pisses me off. I'm like, oh, that guy needs to be fired. You're taking somebody's health care away from them. Yeah. That's a big freaking deal. And if somebody organized, and I'm not just saying Democrats, Republicans, politically, I'm just saying as an organizing principle, I just think that's a good one. It's part of basically a quality of life issue. Like I have no issue with a lot of the social issues, right? I'm pro-choice and all that stuff, of course. But if you want to reach a lot of people, it seems to me healthcare is going to be a way to do it because you can all identify with it. I'm pro-choice because I think it's the right thing to do. I have no issue with drag shows because it's the right, so on and so forth. But those things don't affect me personally. Healthcare does.
Right.
A lot of people think that way. What's it mean to me? And Luigi has shown that years ago. I forget when, a long time ago. There was and we may have talked about this on this show. There was a guy in California named Chris Dorner, who was an ex-cop, and I think he may have been like Black Panther or something too. But anyway,
I think it was ex-military. He was actually maybe
military. Okay,
active.
But he was a cop,
California
though,
National Guard.
Yeah,
he was in LAPD too.
Yeah, and he went on a spree and killed like I don't know dozens of people or whatever. The media,
many of which were cops.
What?
Many of which were cops.
But yeah, no, you went after cops, right? I think he had a case, like he had filed a suit against racial discrimination or something. I don't know what it is. But the point is, regarding relevant to Luigi, like the media had a blackout on that. They wrote very little about it, right? For that reason, they were afraid that people would say, hey, there's an idea. And that's what scares them. And so that's why, and I'm not suggesting from a practical point of view, being violent is not a great idea because the state has a virtual monopoly on violence, right? And they will crush people and kill people, which we see all the time too. But taking a more aggressive approach has to be done. It just has to. like making people afraid of you. And that doesn't mean you have to be afraid walking around. You be afraid politically and economically that these people are going to change the way you do your things because there's so many of them out there. They're so pissed off.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that we talk about violence and violence against Brian Thompson, but like I said at the beginning of the show, 68,000 people die because insurance companies deny life-saving care. I mean, that's not insignificant. That's a small town. That's just a significant amount of people who die because of that. The Biden administration has shipped over money and arms to the Israelis who've killed probably upwards of, you believe the numbers we see, 200,000 or more people, right? The gun industry makes money by selling guns that kill 50,000 people a year. And when we talk about violence, let's talk about the real violence that's going on. And I'm a longtime anti-corporate campaigner and organizer. And I actually think it's good that when some of these people in power and execs are a little bit scared, because then they actually start to maybe think a little bit less about the profit and think a little bit more about what they're scared of.
Yeah. And in addition to their active neglect by refusing to approve treatments, that's 68,000. Think of the people who don't have healthcare at all, right?
Yeah.
Homeless people, right? They're not healthcare. They're dying. I mean, in a sane society, everybody is covered, right? So
there's some not remember. There's 20% of people are not insured, and then 27% of people are like underinsured. Some crazy number like that.
I don't know anymore. It's big. And if you look at things like Obamacare is not a great program either, right? A lot of people I know, like premiums are high, the coverage is difficult. It's just a bad system. Everybody has stories abroad. When I was in Italy, I had a little apartment, and the guy who owned it would have somebody come in once a week to clean. And I forget where she was from. She was Sri Lanka. Anyway, doesn't matter. But her husband got really sick and did a month at the hospital. And she was saying how, and I was telling her in American, that would destroy you. And she said everything was covered. He didn't lose his job. Everything was covered. He was able to get sick leave. So like it was taken care of. Like the guy didn't die and they weren't bankrupt now, because that shouldn't be that big a deal, right? This is your choice. You either chemotherapy or you go bankrupt. Chemotherapy or homelessness, right? Those are your choices in a lot of cases like this. And you want to keep the heat on. I don't know how. I'm not suggesting we need Luigi copycats, but we got to keep the heat on and make them afraid. Yeah. That's the one thing I think a few like Democratic senators have actually, while condemning it, made that point. And I think Murphy maybe from Connecticut, something about that. And Bernie Sanders has too. Elizabeth Warren, I saw getting attacked today because she must have said something that
Elizabeth Warren said, everybody prologues it with, I condemn the murder, but we also need to look at why people are so upset and why there's been this reaction. It's a similar when you see people who are coming out with these more progressive sort of statements. One that was in the New York Times was a Harvard Business School professor, Ron J. Galati, who said, this is pretty much the same thing that Warren said. There's a latent undercurrent here of how frustrated people are with the healthcare industry. I'm not condoning the action in any way, but there's a lot of soul searching we have to do about an industry that consumes nearly 20% of our GDP, and yet the outcomes are not nearly as good as countries that spend half that much.
When Bezruska was on, remember he did the Health Olympics, and the U.S. lifespan is like 48 or something like that.
And been dropping pretty consistently.
It's the same as Cuba, which is a desperately poor country that's been strangled by the worst embargo ever for over 60 years. And yet their lifespan and their child mortality rates in a lot of countries are better, right? The United States spends, what did he say? I think the U.S. spends more on healthcare than the rest of the world combined. Isn't that it?
It's nuts.
It's a huge expenditure. And that's the irony when people talk about healthcare, like a national healthcare system. Oh, your taxes are going to go up. Yeah, but you don't have any medical bills anymore at that point, right? In Italy, again, and I've heard this from people all over, the most right-wing politicians in Italy, like Meloni, would never get rid of the national healthcare system. She just would. They've carved it out. It's clearly, they've had austerity too. It's not what it was 20 some years ago. But the idea of getting rid of it is just not, no one would do. I've talked to people in Italy who follow politics who said that no matter what you believed about everything else, if you said, I'm going to get rid of that, you'd be screwed. Yeah. So we just accept it. We talk about, this gets a much bigger issue because Castro and others used to say this in the 70s when they talk about human rights violations. And people on the left especially would point out, everybody has healthcare, everybody has education. Those are human rights. And that's why in the United States, we don't think of that. Human rights in the U.S. are or what the hell they are anymore. Trump's going to get rid of a birthright citizenship. That's a human right, right? You're born, you're a citizen.
Social Security seems to be on the shopping block too.
Yeah, but in most places, that's not a question. That's a human right.
Yeah.
You're entitled to that. Of course you have healthcare. That's insane. It's so funny because I remember when, was it Palin started the whole bullshit about death panels?
Mm-hmm.
What we have. That's exactly, we have.
Brian Thompson was over a death panel for 50 million people.
Yeah, that's right. And so you have people who are functionaries who aren't paid. In many cases, they're probably making $12-15 an hour under great pressure to get a ton of cases done within a very short period of time. And there was a revelation. It was like 6 months ago. These doctors said that they were just like denying en masse, like thousands of claims at a time. Not even reading them, not even looking at. I mean, luckily I've never had anything serious, but I've had doctors like try to prescribe a med for me that wasn't covered. They did their best. They called insurance. They did all in. Next time you go to a doctor, talk to the staff there and ask them how much time they spent dealing with insurance companies.
Yeah.
I go to this like kind of clinic thing. And a few years ago, I had Blue Cross Blue Shield, and they sent me a thing saying, we're not going to take that anymore. You're going to have to find a new doctor. And this was going to happen. So I went in and talked to the guy about it. He said that their staff there, they had one person who handled all the insurance claims, and they had to hire somebody individually just to do Blue Cross by itself. Like, that's how complicated it was. So you have these people who, instead of like doing doctor stuff, doing nurse stuff, doing medicine, are fucking on the phone and arguing all day with these functionaries whose job is to deny claims, right?
And then the ruling class is wondering why people are so upset about all this and why people are so cheering on Brian Thompson getting shot.
What do I know? But I do think that if 20 years ago or whatever, that somebody on the left had taken this like Bullworth approach, we call it, right? Like Trump did. And Trump tapped into that, not even knowingly. He's just an idiot. That guy has no strategy or anything like that. But he tapped into it, that people are pissed off.
And I think that's how he won this last election, is that he realizes that there's particularly a lot of young men who are pissed off at the system. And I bet Luigi Mangione voted for Trump.
I would be surprised, right?
Yeah.
But it's quite remarkable that this was out there. And there were a lot of people at the time, years ago, saying this is an issue, grab it, latch onto it, and go. And they refused, right? And yes, they get the worst of it, right? They do all the protection for these corporations, and they get blamed for it, right? And so it's funny, Nancy Pelosi, I don't know if you saw the news today, she fell, broke her hip or something like that in Europe, in Germany or wherever. I wonder if she's going to get covered. You think though? She's old. That's a pre-existing condition, man. At that age,
I'm sure
your bones are brittle.
I'm sure she's very well covered, is my guess. The last thing I wanted to talk about real quick is about how the sort of establishment media has been doing everything they can to attack the angry people. And so the two op-eds in the New York Times, which really jump out at me. One is Bret Stephens yesterday, who actually called Brian Thompson the real working class hero because he was an up by your bootstraps guy out of rural Iowa. So there's that. Guys like Bret Stephens are basically just paid to crank out things to attack anything that's anywhere near progressive or anywhere near critical of the existing system. And he's a lot of nasty words. We could say he's not a good person. And then the other is the one that came out today, which is a CEO, which is an op-ed from the United Healthcare's CEO, the parent company, Andrew Whitty, who basically was clearly written by a crisis media firm. It's a press release for United Healthcare that's on the op-ed page of the New York Times.
Oh, yeah. That's why it was hard even to see, what's his name? Luigi's manifesto. It had to be like at Samizdat literature, right? They leaked it out to Ken Klippenstein, right?
Yeah.
The media they didn't want to put up pictures of him because he's a handsome guy. They don't want to humanize him. It is funny.
And which would valorize him, right?
Like you said, we're preparing to do something on Butch Cassidy, that kind of stuff. And those people were heroic. It's like these things you ever see death row prisoners who get all these women proposing marriage to them and stuff. It's what we're dealing with here. And they knew it and they're afraid of it. Luigi, the thing is, it's a symbol, right? That everybody's trying to latch onto and grab it and get something out of and exploit it right now. But a big part of that symbolism is that these people are pissed off at corporate greed. And I think that's a good way to move forward. That's a good way to organize people.
100%.
Because it's funny, Trump, after running this campaign about how the Democrats blew the economy up, yesterday said, I don't know if I can do anything about inflation. It's really hard to change inflation.
Or the price of, I think it's the price of groceries too.
Yeah, but basically, like after running this campaign, I can't do anything about it either. I don't know. I could spend eternity talking about how incompetent the Democrats are, right?
There's also, speaking of the price of groceries, there's also where Lena Khan basically sued to block the merger of Kroger's and Albertsons.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that'll raise the price of groceries is that merger.
And Harris never had her back either. Harris refused to defend her or say a word about her. There's so much to this, but
there's another thing going on in Congress right now where they're actually trying to pass some legislation, which is bipartisan, which is actually being led by Elizabeth Warren and Josh Hawley, where they're going to actually break up pharmaceutical divisions away from some of these major healthcare companies.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, it's remarkable that somebody like Hawley understands that, and the Democratic Party absolutely refuses to.
Yeah, with the exception of Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and people like that.
Care. The Democrats hate them. The Democratic Party.
That's true. It's true.
So yeah, but I think the response to Luigi is something to monitor. We need to keep an eye on that because I think the more they're afraid, I think it could lead to more repression, obviously. But at the same time, 11,000 people in North Carolina had their debts canceled yesterday. It's not a bad thing, whatever the motive is. If you need to make them afraid, do it. They make us afraid every fucking day. Every fucking day, people wake up scared, right? In Palestine, Ukraine, obviously, they're getting killed every day. But even here, am I going to have health insurance? Am I going to lose it? Am I going to have my job? What's the price? Can I pay my bills? That kind of stuff. People are afraid every day. They wake up afraid.
I think that's a kind of the important thing to note. Maybe we can close on that. Is people are afraid to wake up and live their lives, because of all of the, just all the dire things that could potentially happen to them. And healthcare is, something that is important to everybody. Yeah. Unless you're like just so rich that you can just go and buy whatever experimental treatments you want or whatever.
Yeah. It's a weird and fast time. There's a lot going on. No one saw this coming, right? I hate to say it gives us hope. I don't think that's true, but it's something to think about. It may have changed the dynamics a little bit. So.
Yeah. And I think what we've done with this episode has gotten a little bit into the zeitgeist of America right now, which is to say the least. And as we are wrapping up the year, we'll have a couple more episodes probably by the end of the year. But just as we're wrapping up the year, is the kind of important thing is that, and we talk about this all the time. We talk about this in recent episodes, is that whatever you're doing locally, whatever organizing you're doing, whether it's against the genocide or whether it's for a Green New Deal, local Green New Deal, or whether it's joining a union or starting a community group or what have you, that's the important stuff. That's where the power is going to be built. That's the important thing to keep in mind. And like we said, we're not condoning shooting people down in the streets, but it's understandable. And people should definitely be taking more militant action to really challenge the power of the ruling class, of these CEOs and of these politicians, which just do whatever they tell them.
Yeah. Remember, healthcare is a human right. You don't need to do anything to earn it. You just get it by virtue of being born. You should get treatment. You should get healthcare.
Yeah. So then also,
we need to start thinking of it that way. It's a human right.
Yeah. Yeah. I do want to say one last thing though, as we wrap up, which is free Luigi.
Free Luigi.
Yeah.
Like the guys in the prison did.
Yeah, exactly.
They say Luigi's conditions suck, free Luigi.
Yeah, exactly. Folks, you've been listening to the pro bono punditry of the Green and Red podcast. We're wrapping it up for 2024. Got lots more for you in 2025. Don't forget to make a donation and get some of our wonderful merchandise, hat, calendar, book. We also have postcards. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a donation at greenandredpodcast.org and hit that subscribe button and become a patron at patreon.com/greenredpodcast. Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and Blue Sky as of more recently. And then if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. And if you're listening to this on one of the many audio platforms, give us a rate and review because it helps us with the algorithms. And we'll talk to you again soon. And like we say, everybody go out and make trouble and misbehave. And thanks for listening.